and having something like compulsory education. You have to come to our schools, which only get our stamp of approval, and teach the things that we want to teach to young, vulnerable minds. No one else has the right to collect funds coercively for that or compel students to attend.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host,
Mike Lovett.
Hello, Rachel. Yes, you are listening to that great podcast in the sky, And If Love Remains, and I am its messenger. Welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome aboard. We shine the light of truth and all that good stuff that you've heard on every other show since, today. But here we go. I am super excited to have on a returning guest. Man, Keith Knight is the managing editor at the Libertarian Institute. He's the host of the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast and editor of the Voluntaryist Handbook, a collection of essays, excerpts, and quotes, and the author of the book we're going to talk about today, Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons Why I Left Progressivism. Man, Keith, so happy. Most importantly, he's a friend of the show. 3rd time on. Brother, welcome.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. And 4 out of 4 correct points on the bio. Congratulations. I just got to clip that. Just 'cause so often I'm like, I wonder which one he's going to get wrong. Not because of you or anything, but I'm like, the books are kind of very specific names and, it's not such a common title. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure, Mike.
Hey, you're welcome. And I enjoyed reading your latest book, Domestic Imperialism, man. That was a great book and really enjoyed it. And I want to get to it. First of all, man, let's just for a second, you've been like making the rounds. Things are happening. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on with you and the Libertarian Institute and things that are happening in your world, man.
The main thing at the Libertarian Institute is the same thing that we've been going for some time now, which is to create a free educational archive. So anyone interested in the concept of freedom can come to our website, go to our search engine, and type in anything, whether it's immigration, Israel, Winston Churchill, the First World War, and get a good idea of what we advocate or our interpretation of what the correct freedom position is. But I've been working on this book. Now, I know it's very thin, but at the same time, I wanted something so short that would encourage progressives to read. And there's a free PDF at libertarianinstitute.org. So, as always, you can get the material there.
You're just encouraging them to read, period. Is that the thing?
Yeah, I remember holding, a copy of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, and I go, son of a gun, this tiny book had such a big influence. I gotta have, it can't be Man, Economy, and State size. My next one cannot be that big. And then I'm looking at Theodore Herzl's A Jewish State, and I go, I have to write something short and sweet. So this is my attempt to give people the ideas of freedom in a short and concise manner.
No, it's wonderful, and it's really easy to read. I think your points are spot on, and I think you make some interesting points that I haven't heard in other places that I kind of want to go over. That I'm excited to talk to you about. I want to first of all, because it's in your subtitle, 9 Reasons Why You Left Progressivism. Can you talk to me, because your book is so condensed that you don't get into kind of your biography. It is more about the ideas, which is the most important thing. But being a kind of like touchy-feely musician guy that I am interested in your story, your history, and what does that mean that you were a progressive and why you left? Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I originally aligned with progressivism because I thought economically it would be very beneficial to distribute things for free as opposed to making people bear a cost in order to access a product or service. And treating people equally was a better society overall because it gave people more dignity and created more goodwill among the population. Now, on the first count, as far as giving people things for free, the progressive immediately sees that giving spending money on the military doesn't mean the military's free. You're allocating scarce dollars and material resources away from other things in the economy to the military. When they say defund the police, well, what's the problem with giving, people a few $1 million? It's free because the government pays for it. Well, immediately they go, okay, well, it's not free. So the entire progressive narrative of education should be free, healthcare should be free, housing should be free. Well, we see that all of this is the equivalent of saying, cell phones are free, you have to pay for them, but once you pay for them, then they're free. For some way that they were able to get people to say, it's free after they confiscate 30% of your income every year. Well, then everything's free. And then there's just no cost to anything. So first, there's no such thing as free. And then second, it drastically changes the amount of power certain groups within society have. So whether we give the Catholic Church $1 billion or confiscate $1 billion, that changes the amount of power that institution has. Or if we write Raytheon a blank check, that drastically changes the amount of power that they have in society. So it's not just that, oh, this costs money and I'm really cheap. It's if you don't like these organizations which advocate things such as locking down small businesses for an indefinite period of time because of a virus, and you just have to wait until it's completely safe in order to do anything. Well, if you don't like that organization, you should not have to blindly obey their edicts. So when it comes to the principle that progressives are constantly advocating, my body, my choice, all the libertarian does is actually take that and apply it in the economic sphere in advocating a decriminalization of economic activity between consenting adults.
Yeah. And when did that kind of, it is interesting because it for me, I think there's a story there that's common to a lot of people, that when they start to actually engage in and understand economics at a more than freshman college level, it tends to change their outlook on what progressivism, what statism. If you don't like a monopoly, man, then you're really going to hate the state, right? And you make that point over and over in your book. So when did that light come on for you, and what were your main influences in making that happen?
It was so gradual. It would take me some time to think of who the exact main influences were. But on the second point, as to, I was a progressive because I believed in things like equality or egalitarianism.
Oh, yes.
It is amazing that you can advocate such a thing, yet also advocate the existence of a state, which is an explicit unegalitarian social structure, where even if you say, well, parties need to be equal, okay, well, there's no such thing as equal power and influence. That's a fool's errand. But as far as being legally equal, the state has a right to collect funds coercively. No other organization has the right to do that. That's a little unequal. They have the right to compel labor against your will in the form of military conscription, also known as the Selective Service Act. No other organization has the right to do that. That's very unequal. They have a monopoly on printing money with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. That's very unequal. They can kill people after first declaring war on them with more or less impunity. That's extremely unequal. And having something like compulsory education. You have to come to our schools, which only get our stamp of approval, and teach the things that we want to teach to young, vulnerable minds. No one else has the right to collect funds coercively for that or compel students to attend. So far from the state being the mechanism to achieve equality, it is the most unequal institution in society overall. So just being introduced to those ideas, I quickly said, well, if I believe in any sort of, however you define equality, obviously that can't count.
Yeah. And it's interesting that whenever one starts to go back to first principles, when you start to say, okay, I need to use the non-aggression principle, to its fullest, like what does that actually mean, and how does that apply to everyday life? How do I apply the idea that I should allow somebody to say whatever they want to say, or pretty much do whatever they want to do, as long as they're not hurting me and my property? When you start applying those things, like, everything else falls away. And for me, and I think you would agree with this, like, the state becomes a facade. It becomes something that we have piled on top of to muddy the waters of what real natural property rights and what real natural rights are. And that's all the state does, is just muddy those waters to give power to the elite that have the ability to obtain the steer control of those powers.
As Hans Hoppe says, the state is an expropriating property protector, and not just a minimalist expropriator where it's like, all right, they take a microscopic amount, but then there's all these benefits. It's like they take huge amounts and spend on your behalf, making you liable for whatever they spend. I think last year it was $6.27 trillion they spent for our benefit, and still, I never get thanked for paying taxes by any politician or cop or soldiers. They're just so entitled to it at this point. The idea of an expropriating property protector is just ridiculous.
I was reading in the Bible, I was reading the scripture about how a conquered people was forced to pay 20%, to their masters, and that was seen as such a terrible thing. And I think to myself, man, why are we not rising up? Because, man, 20%, give me that all day long.
Well, we had a great shift in opinion from probably the biggest progressive news site that's around, the Young Turks. When Cenk Uygur was on my channel, I interviewed him and I said, all right, so you concede that the U.S. is actively provoking a war with Russia and China over the Donbass region in Ukraine and over Taiwan. Knowing this, they're provoking a third world war. You still think people should be forced to chip in to this organization who's provoking a third world war? And he goes, yep, that's how democracy works. And then, months go by. I know it had to have been nagging at him, because the other day he goes, if Biden still supports Netanyahu as they tell the Palestinians to go from the north to the south, and then they start bombing the south, pushing them into Egypt, well, that's ethnic cleansing, and I'm just going to stop paying taxes if they do that. And I go, oh my gosh, Cenk, I don't even need credit. I don't need an email. Just thank you. Thank you for conceding. It's taken you
awesome.
a while. I don't need the credit. Thank you.
Well, that reminds me of the story not too long ago. I mean, this was, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, of the group of businessmen in San Francisco that realized that their city was going to crap, that saw what everybody else saw, that having, homeless, literally going to the bathroom in their streets and doing drugs and all kinds of stuff. They finally said, wait a sec, I'm paying all this money to the city and they're not cleaning this up, so we're just going to stop paying our taxes. And
except when Xi Jinping comes to town, then
right.
Gavin Newsom makes sure it's crystal
Is that wild?
Clean. Oh yeah. Well, it was but very popular. He goes, well, when someone comes over to your house, when you have a guest, you clean up. And it was like, okay. So far from being, well, it's impossible. There's no way to clean up this city. The government only, confiscates billions of dollars to the state every year. But cleaning is just impossible. Well, it actually was possible when Chairman Xi came in.
And when you're not allowed to clean it up, like, it's one thing, as you and I believe, that if I own a piece of property and I want to clean it up, I'm going to have an incentive to keep that property clean if I want people to come into my business. But if I'm not allowed to clean it up because some police officer is going to come and stop me from cleaning it up because it's going to force somebody off of my property, then all of a sudden, okay, so now I'm paying somebody compulsory to clean something up, and you're not going to do it unless we clearly see the political motivations.
Yeah, and for people who are actually not familiar with this, you have to search far and wide, but it's usually local news stories who will report on something like this. So I actually mentioned it on page 27. It's an article titled Jay Austen's Beautiful Illegal Tiny House from Reason Magazine. They usually do excellent work in here, from August of 2014. Referring to tiny homes built in the area of Washington, D.C., where there's a significant homeless problem. I've been there. So here is what the free market attempt was to resolve the homeless issue, saying, at a cost that ranges from $10,000 to $50,000, tiny homes like the Matchbox could help to ease the shortage of affordable housing in the capital city. Heating and cooling costs are negligible. Rainwater catchment systems help to make the home self-sustaining. They're an attractive option to the very sort of residents who the city attracts in abundance: single young professionals with a lot of stuff who aren't ready to take on a large mortgage. But tiny houses come with one enormous catch: they're illegal, in violation of several codes in Washington, D.C.'s zoning ordinance. Among the many requirements in the 34 chapters and 600 pages of code are mandates defining minimum lot sizes, room sizes, alleyway widths, and accessory dwelling units that prevent tiny houses from being anything more than a part-time residence. So here we have the voluntary sector offering a low-cost option, which progressives say cannot exist in the private sector. They're like, well, if something's privatized, then it's just going to be like $1 billion or like $1 trillion. There's just no limit to what these people will charge. They don't consider the concept of competition and people being able to not buy the product if they don't like it. So they just assume if it's private, costs are going to be through the roof, or prices rather. However, this is actually being done. And what was happened in this case, I also cite the case of Elvis Summers in Los Angeles. These are places with huge homeless populations. So all of our cities are uglier because of progressivism.
Yep.
And this assumption that the state has the right to regulate consenting commercial interactions between adults. So we'd have far fewer people being homeless. I also cite an example in Kansas City of people, Dr. Rex Archer, who's the head of Kansas City Health Association, who ordered his employees to pour bleach on food that was given to the homeless by a group called Free Hot Soup. I think that they were called, place in Kansas City. Because they were doing so, they were giving people starving with no money food without a permit. So because the state increasingly creates hurdles between producers and consumers, or people who have and people who don't have in the case of the homeless, the more barriers there are, the fewer people on the other side of that equation who are going to be helped. They immediately see this in the case of voting restrictions. If you say, well, you have to pass 5 tests and you have to have a driver's license and you have to climb Mount Kilimanjaro 3 times barefoot in order to vote, they'd say, well, obviously that's going to hurt the most vulnerable people in society. But when there's thousands of regulatory pages that you have to comply with in order to start trading with other adult citizens in your own country, well, who do you think that hurts? You think Jeff Bezos is like losing sleep at night and calling Sam Walton, oh, how are we going to deal with these regulations? Of course, it hurts the most vulnerable people with the least amount of resources. So this is why progressivism, while it sells itself on vilifying the rich, it ends up hurting the poor.
100%, and those unseen consequences, as Bastier said, they're clearly they're only unseen because you are unwise and unwilling to read a book.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was funny. I was harking back to you in your last chapter. There's and I can't remember the gentleman you were interviewing, but he just had such a great quote. It was something to the effect of like, yeah, everybody wants to stop your choice except for theirs,
Oh, who was that? I want to say that was Johan Norberg. This is a guy from Sweden who wrote an excellent book titled Progress, 10 Reasons to be Optimistic About the Future. And what my question was, look, there's tons of arguments about free market shortcomings. There's greed, there's nepotism, there's corruption. The problem is these are human problems that will always exist in any society. Bringing in a monopoly on violence, a state, doesn't stop these at all. In fact, it actually exacerbates them. So are there any criticisms that uniquely apply to the free market? And I asked this to like 3 or 4 professors at the end of the book, and he said, well, his answer was essentially the paradox of choice, I think it's generally referred to as, where if you have 2 options, you pick one, and that means you only left one thing on the table, and you don't end up regretting it. You're pretty happy with your decision. But if you try going to the Cheesecake Factory and finding the great thing to order, there's so much, no matter what you order, you're like, oh, I should have gotten something else because there's thousands of options that you didn't get a chance. So maybe, he says, an overwhelming amount of choice is very difficult for human beings to contemplate and deal with in the real world. Therefore, a state, limiting choices could help some people in the short run. So the immediate question is, Well, which organization gets to regulate this? Surely, if Vladimir Putin started limiting Americans' choices, they wouldn't say, "Thank you so much for not getting me stuck in the paradox of choice, Vladimir." They'd say they already, tried framing him for fake election interference in 2016 and in 2020. Imagine if he really started legislating against people's, freedoms on their behalf, allegedly. Well, immediately they'd say, well, maybe the choice is bad for me, but who the hell are you to tell me this? So, what people end up doing is using voluntary methods of regulation. This involves places like Yelp, Amazon reviews, underwriters' laboratories will give their stamp of approval. Tech companies, if you go to in Arizona at least, you can call them up and say, "No, what technology do you guys recommend that we use? What should we stay away from?" And for a small fee, they will tell you, here are things that work really well and have very good reputations. So the idea that, well, we wouldn't have any standards and there'd be too much choice and everything, there's still ways to differentiate good and bad products and services and, people to associate with. So the reason that I put that at the end is because, you can bash progressivism all day long, but if it's still the best alternative, well, then you're just criticizing the best thing that's around and saying, oh, there's a shortcoming. Well, there's always going to be shortcomings that people will frequently cite. Churchill allegedly said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Okay, well, if there really is an alternative, then we should look at it. And sure enough, there are alternatives, even something like roads. In America, I want to say in 1795, the first road ever paved, the Philadelphia Lancaster Turnpike, was a private road. Organizations today, like Vinci Concessions, constantly make roads and railways. Yeah, well, even railways were privatized with people like Vanderbilt and Rockefeller at the beginning. So turns out everything can be privatized. There is an actual alternative. That's why I made it the last chapter of the first section of the book.
And you make such a great point about I don't remember the cathedral, but there's the cathedral I think in England, and then the Statue of Liberty that were all funded, by private donations. They're funded by ways other than government funding, other than coercion, that allowed beautiful, wonderful, glorious monuments to be built, without and here's the other thing, everything, and you said it earlier, everything that the state does is ugly, period. Everything the state does is ugly. And we see that over and over, from architecture to art, everything it does is ugly. But when people come together as a community, as in a charitable contribution, or in a religious outlook, or even just a trying to build a statue of as a symbol to freedom, beauty happens.
Yeah, so the examples I use are the Statue of Liberty in New York City. You can actually visit there. There's a trip that it's a 2-for-1. You get to go to the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. Tons of very interesting materials to read. I actually did this last year with my aunt, and you can find out how the Statue of Liberty was built in France by a bunch of voluntarily funded donations. And it is interesting to see how they still made money by getting people to donate funds voluntarily and to take people on tours as they were building it. They would charge people. So it's not like someone's gonna gain, but someone has to lose in this scenario. It's like, no, the second you say, here's your constraint, do anything you want, that is within the realm of voluntarism, then people get so creative in what they can come up with. So the Statue of Liberty is the first one, and then the Salisbury Cathedral in England is just this beautiful cathedral. And so often people like Tucker Carlson will say, well, all the Walmarts of the world are making it so ugly. Walmart is related to business. Business is related to capitalism. Therefore, capitalism yields ugly things. And that could be true, but all you have to do is say, well, if people really want beautiful things, what sort of system would we rather have? One where they can voluntarily donate to them, or one in which the state more or less has a monopoly on what can and can't get built under the guise of helping, the collective or whatever? And the answer is very clear. You want a free market system.
Absolutely. And talking about those Walmarts, how many Walmarts would look so much better if they didn't have so much regulation and so much red tape? They have to have have a cookie cutter box so that everyone's the same and it's going to fit no matter whether you put one in Los Angeles or if you put one in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Houston, Texas. It all has to be the same because the organization's so big and you have to comply with so many rules and so many laws. It's bound to be ugly and lame. If an individual business could create, wanted to create a landmark to bring customers in and to make something beautiful that kind of works with the environment that they live in, man, I think Walmart would do that if they could.
Oh, yeah. Well, I worked at a Walmart for some time when I was much younger, and you should see the difficulty. All we wanted to do was, believe it or not, reconstruct the road that was a public road because, not because the CEO of Walmart was so kind. Doug McMullen, I don't know if he's still the CEO. I thought he was actually kind of a jerk. Took every opportunity to promote social justice causes.
Right.
Took every opportunity to advocate increasing the minimum wage. Wonder why Walmart would be doing that. But because a better road would attract more customers to our area. And they straight up treat you like a criminal if you want to make your society look better than it currently does. Adam Carolla famously said this. He goes, all you pro-government people, do me a favor, move to LA and just build something on property you already own.
Right.
Just build a shed. Just extend your garage and you will hate him. He goes on this long rant and he has a great interview with Gavin Newsom on, or I think Gavin Newsom was the mayor at the time when Carolla had him on. But yeah, that was Carolla's point that, once you see how difficult they actually are, it's not like just this theory. We're called the people who just live in theory world. When they're like, oh, no, government's here to keep you safe. It's like, okay, try actually building something when, of course, it's a bunch of rioters who are always telling you that more things need to be built and there needs to be more opportunities and they never offer you opportunities. It's just the opposite of the way things should be.
No,
and can be.
It is the opposite. And it is hilarious that people who believe like us are accused of, living in fantasy land, because the truth is the idea of zoning laws, the idea of city planners is such a brand new phenomena. It used to be that a village would organically grow and families would commune with each other. And why would you need a police department when the mom down the street was saying, hey, why are you still outside? It's after, why would you need why would you need a Walmart if you could go to the farmer down the street? Like, in other words, there was a system and it worked beautifully and it happened organically and it happened like that. But when people came in and wanted to control and frankly gentrify communities, blow up communities, split communities, do all the things that government does to destroy families and to destroy communities. Now we're in a situation of now we have to rebuild what was already built before, and yet we have all these constraints to do it.
Exactly. They see it crystal clear in the healthcare sector. They go, well, if you raise the cost of healthcare, poor people, it'll be harder. The higher the price, the harder it is for poor people to access healthcare. But when you say you have to drastically increase the cost of building things, well, fewer things are going to get built. And the current builders have less competition. So they're not going to be saying, well, we really got to make an attractive structure here in order to get people. So by any metric you use, just morally, economically, these regulations should not be on the books.
Yeah. One of the chapters you put in, I appreciate it very much, because it is a fallacy that you hear, is that, and I love your title, that government provided doesn't mean universal. Something to that effect, I think. Government provided, yeah, I was right. Woo! Government provided does not mean universal. I love that concept, because the government provided schools, government provided healthcare. Anything that's government provided is going to create scarcity by definition. It happens every time, and you can see every bubble that was created because of a government program that was, on the surface was trying to do good. The truth was trying to enrich others. But I love what you're talking about there in that chapter. Can you talk about where you came up with that and why that's an important aspect to your growth in this book?
Of course, yeah. A lot of programs are sold by progressives as saying this should be something universal, whether it's healthcare, housing, food, shelter, schooling. What they are conflating is a goal versus a process. So if you want everyone to have something, that doesn't tell you what process you should use in order to achieve universal access. Thankfully, the government originally had the Langley project, which was competing with the Wright brothers for who could build the airplane. And fortunately, people today have much more access than they otherwise would as a result of the Wright brothers winning that fight against the Langley project.
Oh,
Almost positive.
and frankly, the government deregulating the airlines in the '70s, allowing for cheaper airlines. I mean, gave a whole bunch more people access to that kind of travel.
Exactly. I want to say it was the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, which I also mention in the book. So, all we have to do before saying, well, healthcare should be universal, is look at what the state already provides in terms of, say, schooling. Just because the state provides it doesn't mean we have a universally educated population. To the contrary, just because the state does basically already attempts to provide universal health care with something like Medicaid. The whole thing was Medicare is for people who can't work, and Medicaid is for people who can't afford health insurance or health care, rather. And everyone else can either buy it. So that takes care of everyone: the elderly who aren't working and producing, the poor, and then people who can already afford it. Well, all this has done is drastically increase the amount of healthcare costs in society since the implementation of FDA expansion, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, Medicare Part D under George Bush Jr. So giving the state a monopoly on something does not render it in a state of universality. The progressive sees this immediately with the police. If you say, well, you don't have to worry about injustice because we already have universal guaranteed justice between the police and the court system,
Right?
and it's free. We
It's
have free
free.
guaranteed universal justice. They go, oh, well, no, that's a terrible product. That costs way too much. So, of course, they think like just changing the words you use to describe the same thing is going to yield a different outcome. It's just a total fallacy to say that. I want everyone to have something, therefore, it should be provided by a coercively funded monopoly.
Right, right. And I think your healthcare example is spot on, because the other thing that it does is it creates classes of people where the middle class has to even subconsciously make a decision. Am I going to am I going to find a way to fit in that Medicaid box, which seems to expand more and more? And so you're losing this productive class, that we have of people that are producing and that are making things, because of something as simple as healthcare. And the only reason why prices are going up so incredibly high is because so much of it is regulated, and so much of it is well, I think regulation, kind of covers it, subsidized also. And who's subsidizing it? It is the productive class as subsidizing. And the productive class, by the way, I don't mean the billionaires and the millionaires. I'm talking about the people that actually pay the taxes to the elite class, because we have this like idea that capitalism, and the free market helps the wealthy. It really doesn't. It helps the poor become more wealthy, and what the wealthy want is more status and more power, and more coercion, so that they have less competition. And I just said about 14 things, and so I'll let you go.
So the first half of the book is a basically extension of a version of a speech I gave at the University Club in Arizona, and then the second portion is a collection of quotes from my favorite books that I've read over the years. And the first one actually isn't even from a book; it's just a tweet from Michael Malice, and he goes, if the government didn't have a monopoly on security, only rich people would have security. Just like when the government got out of other businesses, the only cars produced were limousines, the only clothes produced were tuxedos, and the only food produced was foie gras. So
Yeah.
immediately you see, look, even if you're saying, well, I care about the poor. That doesn't automatically mean the state should have any role in what's being provided, because there's a built-in incentive for producers to market their products and services to the masses at large. I just hit the microphone. Sorry. When you take the case of Henry Ford, he very well could have just made a few cars for the elites, but not because he was such a kind, virtuous person, because it was in his self-interest to have as many customers as possible. So he drastically lowered the cost of the Model T,
Right.
just like Vanderbilt drastically decreased the cost of accessing steamship travel. This is something huge. Carnegie didn't, quadruple the price of steel, which, affects the price of everything else that's made in society. He drastically decreased the price of steel with his production process because of competition, because of his ability to innovate and trade with people voluntarily. So if you care about the poor, abandon progressivism and embrace libertarianism.
I don't remember reading this in your book. Do you remember the story of Dole Chemical and Borean, I think it is?
You know what? I know I had to
I
have heard
think
it from
it's
either
a
Bert
Tom Wood
Folsom
speech. I think it's a Tom Wood speech where he talks about Dole going and getting buying borium from the Germans at 8 cents or whatever, and then selling it back to them at 13 because of the regulations that they had put in place. It's a great story because there's and this is the other thing, is that there's always going to be, I always say that the only true market is the black market. There's always going to be a market for goods and services and the things that people want and desire. And the more free and open we can be, and which also means a free and open currency or money supply, fair at least, then it allows people to provide those services at less and less cost. And what does that cost mean? How many, I think of things in terms of how many piano lessons is this going to cost me,
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? That means that when prices go up, that means I have to charge my students more money. And man, that's a burden on everybody. And people go, well, that's just how it is. But it's not how it is. If we're becoming more economic, think prices should be going down. And man, it ticks me off that people don't understand that simple idea.
It's just so frustrating. More regulations lead to more costs. Higher
Yeah.
costs to produce mean higher costs for consumers, which leads to fewer options for consumers. And it creates the very oligopolies and monopolies that the progressive claims to be against.
For sure. Where before we move on, I neglected to make sure that we get this in. Where can people buy your book and read it?
Check out libertarianinstitute.org. In the book section, you can find Domestic Imperialism. You can also find it on Barnes & Noble as well as Amazon. But if you go to the Libertarian Institute, you can find the main links there.
Perfect. And the Libertarian Institute is one of my very favorite organizations. They're a organization that I contribute to. I think it's a very important organization. And the writers, including yourself and Scott, Lori, I've had her on. You guys do such great work because you're telling the truth, man. You're telling the truth, and it's. I just hope to see your organization grow and gain more influence every day.
Thanks so much. Libertarianinstitute.org. People can check it out.
Absolutely. You have a chapter in your book which I thought is very interesting, called Voter Suppression versus Economic Suppression. And talk about that a little bit. And I think we've talked around that a little bit, but specifically, what do you mean by voter suppression versus economic suppression?
So this is the very idea that if you increase the cost of voting with regulations, you end up hurting the most vulnerable people in society. It makes it harder for them to vote. All I do is take the case of, well, if voting is about, making sure people's, desires are reflected in the society at large, the reality is that if your one vote, whether it goes in the voting box or in the shredder, is not going to change the outcome. But something that actually does change the outcome in your life is the amount of economic opportunities you have with what you can buy, in opposition to regulations, tariffs, and embargoes. So that restricts how your life could actually be better. Restricting who your employer can be, restricting where you can build. That is the actual suppression, which negatively affects every person every single day. Whereas voter suppression, look, if someone was suppressing someone else's vote, I think that psychologically that could do a lot of damage as far as increasing feelings of insecurity, but it's not going to change the outcome. Any economic suppression, which the progressive actually advocates, that drastically affects everyone almost negatively. So the example I use is, okay, if you're against voter suppression, if tomorrow we said, look, blacks just can't vote in America anymore, people would rightfully be outraged because of the blatant double standard. But I went to a bunch of these school choice meetings in Arizona when Doug Ducey was governor, and it was this huge thing.
Right.
I would ask a lot of people there, I'd say, would you give up your vote if it meant you could actually choose where your dollars went to which school you could send your kids to? And they said, oh, obviously, absolutely. Look, it's nothing that I'd brag about or do happily, and it could lead to other bad things, and that would be difficult. But as far as what has a bigger effect on your life,
Right.
voting once every 4 years for two politicians who are total liars, and God knows if the votes are even counted, or products and services that you actually consume, where you go to work. So I asked people to imagine two criminals, a voter suppressor and an economic suppressor. The voter suppressor sneaks into your house, steals your ballot, and just puts it in the trash, and you don't get to vote. Versus the guy who violently stops you by threatening you from getting a job as a hairdresser or a massage therapist, or getting on the job experience at a hospital, or stops you from working at a supermarket. Which of these two criminals, but both of them, let's say, did something wrong, which one would you give a larger sentence to? Which one is a bigger threat to society? Someone who stops voters, or someone who actually stops you from accessing products and services which make your life better? And immediately you say, okay, if I am against voter suppression at all, every reason I'm against voter suppression, I should be against economic suppression,
Right.
which is the state coercively intervening in voluntary interactions. So that is the premise of that chapter.
It's well written, and the point is absolutely clear. I think, because frankly, voter suppression is happening even if the votes are counted all the way, even if you do go in and vote, because the bottom line is who I vote for is not the person that I may represent. In other words, like, if my neighbor votes more than I do, like, how am I represented by that representative? I'm not, because I didn't vote for him. And so it's already suppressed. Whereas in an economic transaction, I love the Milton Friedman. If I want to buy your tie, there's a price for your tie at a Walmart. And if I want a blue one, I can have a blue one. If I want a green one, if I want a Mises tie, I can go to the Mises Institute and buy a Mises tie. In other words, I have unlimited choices. Where in the political field, we are suppressed to two choices within a window of about that much.
Yeah, really. And they're always telling us that the free market leads to oligopolies. Okay, well, the political process has Democrats and Republicans. If that's not an oligopoly, I don't know what it is. Look at how hard do those politicians work to make sure the Green Party, the People's Party, the Libertarian Party
Yep.
get on stage. Certainly, if they are the solution to oligopolies, they should be the least oligopic institution in society, at least. And they, of course, never do that.
Right.
So you always have people who want more power in any society. The question is which sort of set of rules or processes should be embraced to decrease the amount of oligopolies that would exist. And obviously the answer is a free market where there's fewer barriers to entry, more competition, and more freedom to trade with others.
Absolutely. Hey, Keith, I want to finish with this one. First of all, I really encourage people to go purchase your book. It is a great read. It's a short read, and you'll get for bang for the buck, as far as time it takes to read it and the amount of information you get. It's top notch. Absolutely wonderful. You are well read. You're one of you. I can't think of anybody that can spout out libertarian philosophy in quotes quite as well as you. Frankly, it's wonderful that when I see you on, and I appreciate your time with me. What books other than yours would you recommend for people to read if people say, "Hey, man, I really want to get into this"? What are maybe a short library of books that you would recommend people to pick up?
Hans Hoppe's book, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, that is for someone generally interested in getting a little further in the ideas. What he essentially does is gets to the root differences between communism, the abolition of private property, socialism, the institutionalized aggression against private property, and capitalism, a social system based on the explicit recognition of non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. He really lays that out. That would be a great economics textbook. Second, maybe Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. That is a great empirical analysis of the free market, whereas Hans Hoppe is a little more theory oriented, but still gets into empirical examples. And as far as the morality, I would say Murray Rothbard's book published in 1974 titled For a New Liberty. Those would be the books that I would check out. And then historically, one book is titled Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism by Scott Horton, where he goes through each aspect of the war on terror, has a chapter on Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Syria. Very informative. And this is just vitally important because so much of the state gaining its legitimacy doesn't come from people engaged in philosophical discussions, but they're like, look, the reality is we got a bunch of terrorists who want to blow our heads off because we are free. Well, Scott Horton just takes a hammer to each one of those cases individually, even with the main case of Afghanistan, the most popular of those wars. He makes it clear that in October of 2001, the Taliban was willing to hand bin Laden over to any third country who would take them, and the entire war could have been avoided, along with the humiliating withdrawal, which was probably still necessary. Other historical book would be Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War by Richard Nixon's speechwriter, Patrick J. Buchanan, where he makes the case that not only was the First World War unjustified and led to millions of deaths and terrible outcomes, including Hitler, Mussolini, and the Bolshevik regime in Russia, but even the Second World War, which has a lot of support even today, led to tens of millions of deaths and the Bolshevik regime getting half of Europe, and led to proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, fighting in Angola, as well as Afghanistan. So, yeah, those are the books I'd recommend on history, economics, and morality.
Fantastic. In fact, I just got, where is my copy? Oh, there it
I'll
is.
trust that you have it.
There it is. Coming to Palestine. Just pick that one
yes.
up, man. I'm looking forward to digging into this. I think that's an important one for what's going on too in that area of the world. Man, Keith, I really appreciate your time. This is wonderful. Check him out at the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast, Libertarian Institute, and then of course pick up his book, Domestic Imperialism: 9 Reasons. Yeah.
But before I go, were you able to tell who all of these 5 people are on the cover?
Oh, you know what? Because I looked at it, I got a PDF of it. I didn't see the cover. Yeah. So let me look at your cover. Let me see if I
know what, this is the print version. So the first run. So it actually has this.
Wait, is that AOC on the right?
Center. Yeah. I was just curious. I got a great artist to do this. It's Mises Pieces on Twitter. You can find his work, Andrew. He does terrific work. I just like asking interviewers. I go, to me, it looks so clear, but then again, I chose every one of the faces, so of course I know who they are. I thought this was just great.
I did see a cover of the book, and I do. It is, and obviously I can see it now. It is a great cover. I love like the stark, like bold colors, and the font is fantastic. So.
Yeah, the goal was to show that when I'm criticizing progressivism, it's not just the SJWs of today. This is actually an ideology that goes back to, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, Bernie Sanders, and today AOC. So it is something that's embraced by and because most corporate marketing campaigns, Hollywood, human resource institutions
Yeah.
and even the Republican Party to a very large extent.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say, because those are the waters that we swim in. I mean, you can make a case that Reagan, for the hero of the right, was a big progressive in a lot of areas. You can make a case definitely for George W. Bush. And as you talked about, Scott Horton's book, it is an absolute fact. When one realizes that war is the health of the state, man, that changes your perspective on everything, because you realize that everything that we do is focused on creating, maintaining, and extending war.
Exactly. Yeah. Check his book out. It's titled "Enough Already: Time to End the War on Terrorism."
All right. Well, domestic imperialism, Keith Knight, brother, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Anytime, Mike.
Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Gone but not forgotten.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.